Now I'd like to introduce this evening's presenters, Helen and Nat Kuykendall. Helen is the chair of the Athens-Clarke County Historic Preservation Commission and serves on the board of the Piedmont Gardeners Club. She has 23 years of professional experience in the field of landscape architecture. In her work at Denver Parks and Rec, she focused on local level planning, facilitating public meetings, and integrating multiple local agencies to collaborate on park projects. And she was instrumental in establishing a program for historic park management for the department. Her experience also includes 14 years as a landscape architect with the National Park Service, where she served as the team leader for projects in parks nationwide. And Nat is currently vice chair of the Oconee Rivers Greenway Commission. He retired in 2008 after 32 years with the National Park Service, starting as a seasonal ranger at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and ending as the chief of the planning division of the Denver Service Center. Nat served as a natural resource specialist and project manager for more than 40 planning projects, and he led 2 NPS reports to Congress that spurred the establishment of the New Orleans Jazz Historic National Park and the development of the Blue Ridge Music Center. Helen and Nat moved to Athens in 2008 and are both passionate about gardening, history, green spaces, and life in Athens. Please join me in welcoming Helen and Nat Kuykendall.
Thank you, Angela. Can everyone hear me okay? Good. Thanks for coming out tonight. It's not a good night for travel, but appreciate your being here. Before we get started, there's some people here who are very much involved in Beech Haven and its preservation. I just want to introduce them very quickly. First, we have Lucy Rowland, who's representing the family tonight. And Lucy has been involved in leading tours of the site. You'll see her picture in a couple of these scenes coming up. Ron Thomas is the chair of the Greenway Commission. We're glad to have Ron here today. Another person who has been very much involved in protection of this site is Jerry Neesmith, our county commissioner in the back there. We appreciate it, Jerry. And the head of the organization that is doing the on-the-ground work right now is Amy Cassane, with the executive director of the Heritage Foundation here in Athens. He's hiding in the back. One other person who's very much involved is Carrie Getchus, Dr. Carrie Getchus with UGA College of Environment and Design, specialist in cultural landscapes. And last but not least, it's our great honor to have him here from San Francisco, Paul Ducherer, author and designer, expert in the arts and crafts movement, and he'll be giving us some closing words later in the presentation. Thank you, Paul, for being here. So we want to tell you about this special place, and I've got to figure out how this specially works. There we go. Okay. This is a map of the county and includes the greenway that has been set aside by county ordinance for protecting our river system and our natural resources along the river. This map identifies some of those resources. And here are some special ones. Everyone probably knows Sandy Creek Park up there on the North Oconee River and the Sandy Creek Nature Center just below that. Got a circle around downtown and the campus. There's going to be a lot of new construction going on within the next year or two to extend the existing Greenway pathway for connections with East Athens and downtown and the campus. At the bottom down there, after the confluence of the North Oconee and the Middle Oconee, one of the tributaries there is a special place called Rock and Shoals, a granite outcrop that has exceptional indigenous species there and plants in that area. Up on the county line on the Middle Oconee is the new area been acquired by the county, about 300 acres. It's the Tallahassee Forest that's in planning right now and will be a future park. Ben Burton Park, people are probably familiar with. It's going to be undergoing some new planning over the next few years and some reworking there. And then the place I want to talk about, Beech Haven. This is also a new acquisition by the county. It's right on the Middle Oconee River where the Atlanta Highway crosses over, and it has a very long history. Here's a close-up of it. Again, the Atlanta Highway, Beech Haven Baptist Church marks the edge of what originally was a farm. Howard Johnson's is included. It wasn't there, of course, at the time. In fact, the Atlanta Highway wasn't built till the 1930s. So this was an original farmstead that was purchased in 1909 by the Rowland family. What's in green there is already now owned by the county, and the county is working with the family in purchasing some additional landscape. Right now, the county owns about 82 acres. Well, these are the folks that made this place happen. This is Charles Alden Rowland II and his wife, Effie Hampton Rowland. Charles is from Augusta, Georgia originally, from a well-placed family there. And Effie, originally from Talladega, Alabama, they met here in Athens and became a real, an important family in the life of Athens, as we'll see. They had 5 children. Hampton was the oldest son. Catherine you'll hear a lot about in this presentation. Betty or Elizabeth, Alice, and Charles III. That little guy in the wagon there with his father and the cat, Charles III was Lucy's father-in-law here. I don't know the name of the cat. Let's see. Charles Rowland was quite a fellow. He was a businessman, and he was also very religious and very involved in the Southern Presbyterian Church, especially with foreign missions. In 1910, he managed to raise about $1 million for foreign mission, an outstanding amount of money at that time. And he was quite a figure and very dedicated to everything he did. He traveled all over, not only the Southeast, but the country, trying to raise these funds and being very successful at it. He was very involved early on in his life. This is the first conference at what became Montreat conference grounds in North Carolina. Do we have Presbyterians here? Do you know about Montreat? That's where Presbyterians go when they die. It's a beautiful place in the mountains of North Carolina. And this person here is Charles Rowland II. This is 1897. And he was on the first board of directors. He was the only Southerner at the time, because originally it was owned by an interdenominational Protestant group. And Charles represented the South. He was very, I think, integral to the purchase of this site by the Southern Presbyterian Church later. And Montreat had a real effect on Charles. I think he loved the beauty of the place and the design that blended with the natural environment there. And this was a big effect on him and his approach to his life. And in fact, in 1909, when he was considering buying this farmstead, Mr. Epps, Ben Epps' father, the man who our airport's named for, was giving him a tour of the land, and he was showing him all the prime areas you could use for crops. But toward the end of the day, he said, well, there's this other area I've got to show you. It's the rough area of my property. It's got this boulder-filled creek. All the sides are steep to the hills there, and it's full of these big trees. And that's what sold Charles Rowland on purchasing that property for $4,000, about 280 acres for $4,000, an outrageous amount at the time. And here, they started out picnicking and camping on the site, but by 1911, they had completed construction of their summer house here, and this became the heart and soul of the family's activities and later community activities at Beech Haven. We'll hear more about that later from Helen. Another important part of the story at Beech Haven is a trip in 1914 that Charles took around the world with his daughter Catherine, his oldest daughter. She was 18 at the time. He was part of a contingent of 4 people to go inspect Presbyterian missions in the Orient. And in May of 1914, they left from San Francisco and traveled to Japan for most of June. And in July, they were, or later in June, they were in China. And they ended in late July in Korea. And this is an earlier photograph of a similar inspection tour. But they were very affected by what they saw, especially the gardens and landscapes there. The side story, on the way back, they cabled to Effie. Effie had stayed back with the 4 kids and said they were getting on the Trans-Siberian Railroad, 6,000 miles to Moscow and St. Petersburg, and they'd be out of touch for a few days. This was about July 25th, 1914. Anybody know what happened on July 28th, 1914? Yeah, that was the mobilization for World War I, and they were nationalizing transportation and communication and all sorts of other resources in Russia. So the headline finally in August was they finally found the Rowlands. They got to a place where they could cable Effie and tell them that they were okay and would be coming home. By the 1st of September, they made it back to Athens. But again, that experience in the Orient had a major impact on how they approached the landscape at Beech Haven, and my wife's going to give us some design context for that. Oh, and I'm going to turn this thing off again.
Go do that. All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much again for coming out tonight. Now, one thing I have to tell you about myself that Angela did not mention is that I am also a yoga teacher. And I am very skilled at making people feel very comfortable and relaxed. And usually at the end, everybody's on the floor half asleep. But I'm going to really try hard not to make you all fall asleep tonight. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I'm going to do tonight is do a little virtual walk through the woods at Beech Haven. That'll be part of our presentation tonight. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about the arts and crafts movement and just do a little historical context of that period in order to understand Beech Haven a little bit better regarding the arts and crafts movement. So, and I'm going to do this arts and crafts really basic 101 and 2 minutes or less. So usually people do this in much longer time period. But anyway, first thing you need to know about this is that the period that the arts and crafts movement extended from roughly between 1880 and the 1920s, which is one of my most favorite historical periods because, you know, that is also the period in which Downton Abbey is taking place. So that is a wonderful period. So there's a connection, you know, Downton Abbey, Beech Haven. So anyway, the arts and crafts movement really began as a reaction against the industrialization and the sort of machine factory production that had really transformed society in Great Britain. And among a certain group of intellectuals, they felt that there was a sense that Britain was beginning to lose their traditional crafts and traditions of handmade decorative arts. And so this group of intellectuals got together and kind of established a renewed interest in handicrafts such as pottery, stained glass, woodworking, paper making, that sort of thing. And the proponents really extolled this beauty of nature and really simplicity of things. That was really their sort of passion, was in particular that nature should inspire people, and that we were losing our connection with nature. And William Morris is considered the father of the movement, and he lived between 1834 and 1889. And he established an artisanal workshop in England, and he's best known for his wallpaper designs, which used a lot of these natural motifs, very recognizable in the field. So one thing that I want to mention about the arts and crafts is that it's not so much a real recognizable particular style. It's really more of a philosophy of design. So, and that philosophy is really rooted in celebrating the beauty of all things in nature and designing things in partnership with nature. And so what's really important is to design in harmony with nature, and develop this relationship, and really connect everything from the inside of a house all the way to the architecture and the setting beyond. Also focused on incorporating handmade elements, and really using local traditions, using craftsmen and crafted kind of traditions for the designs. Also, they focused on simplifying and allowing function to guide the form, and we'll see a little bit of that more in particular later on. And then also really important also is creating with locally found materials. So, even though we tend to think of arts and crafts in terms of individual elements like a lamp or a vase or wallpaper, that kind of thing, the arts and crafts movement was very much a holistic philosophy for a lifestyle, a comprehensive lifestyle. And so an arts and crafts proponent, designer, would design everything from the inside of a house all the way to the architecture and the landscape, so that the house, the gardens, the furniture, the lamps, the dishes, vases, silverware, everything would all be designed to complement and sort of complete a very intentional vision that was rooted in nature. So, and tonight I'm going to focus primarily on arts and gardens and architecture, and as I said, the arts and crafts movement was a reaction against the Victorian style, and what I'm showing here is a typical Victorian garden. This is Shrewsbury Dingle in England. And you can see in this picture how much nature is controlled and dominated. So there are a lot of clipped hedges, and everything is very controlled, very geometric paths. And then the Victorians loved exotic plant materials, and they were just loved anything that came from foreign lands and really didn't belong in England. And they loved bedding out of gaudy colors, anything gaudy and clashing of colors, that was the best. And they also loved ornate statuary, and they put that all together into these very elaborate gardens. So the arts and crafts garden is very much a contrast to that. The arts and crafts garden would be much more in tune with nature. Plants would be allowed to maintain their natural shapes and their form. Local woodlands and meadows and creeks would be kind of the inspiration for garden layouts and materials. And there was definitely a much greater sense of informality in the design. And you can see in this picture how the shrubbery is just sort of overflowing onto the paths. And this particular garden is Munstead Woods in England, and it was designed by Gertrude Jekyll, who is considered one of the best and most well-known garden designers of that period, of the arts and crafts period. And she came from a fairly wealthy family in England, and as a young woman studied art, and in school she met William Morris, the father of the arts and crafts period, and she was very much influenced by him in his circle. And as a young woman, she decided she was going to create her own place, her own arts and crafts lifestyle with a home and garden and the whole 9 yards. And she met Edwin Lutyens, a young architect at the time, and she hired him to design her house. And they collaborated together to design the house and the garden all as one. And it became, and that was Munston Woods. So the house was designed by Edwin Lutyens. And so this became, the two of them collaborated on many more designs for various estates in England and became very popular. And let's see, and then, so moving on to across the pond to the United States, Gustav Stickley is considered a primary advocate, American advocate, who had actually traveled to England and became immersed in the arts and crafts movement in about 1898. He was a furniture maker, and many of you probably are familiar with his furniture. And he incorporated many of those ideas into his furniture making in the company that he established. And you can see in this chest of drawers pictured here, you can see that that functionality of the furniture is really exposed, and the design of the hinges and the screws and the mortise and tenon and all that would be part of the design, part of the aesthetic of his architecture, and that's very much characteristic of an arts and crafts style. But he also had his own property that he developed, again, in that arts and crafts philosophy. And his motto is, "Let the garden and house float together as one harmonious whole." And you can see a picture of his property. It was called the Craftsman Farm. It was developed on or around 1908. And you can see these principles, these arts and crafts principles. He's got a log cabin, very rustic, kind of Adirondack style. And then also you can see some of the rock walls and very naturalistic gardens. So another example of an arts and crafts garden and house and garden. And now, the arts and crafts is probably best known for with the American Bungalow that kind of swept across the country in various modes and styles. It was really epitomized in California during the 1920s. And the American Bungalow emphasized that indoor-outdoor lifestyle, and where better to have that lifestyle in California. So though the houses tended to have very large porches and patios, the buildings tended to be low and really low to the ground, really grounded into the landscape. You would see exposed rafters, deep overhangs, very distinctive architectural elements that helped to blend that house into the setting. And then the gardens would just about crawl over the houses. You know, they just were the house and the garden, again, just all blended into one kind of unified approach. And these postcards helped, were very popular at the time. They kind of helped promote that bungalow style, and that style can be seen in many communities across the country. And our esteemed guest here, who's here tonight, Paul Deshera, has written several books and has done many talks across the country. He's an expert in the American bungalow, and perhaps he'll say a few words about that tonight. Anyway, he has some wonderful books that we have a book that we never put back on the shelf. It's always handy to refer to as we do our own garden designs. Such an inspiration, Paul. So, all right, another thing to mention about the arts and crafts movement, particularly in the United States, is the Japanese influence. Around the turn of the century, about the 1890s, there were a couple of events that really helped kind of raise the consciousness about Japanese architecture and design, and one of them was the World's Columbian Exhibition of 1893 in Chicago, and Kyoto Temple was built there for that particular exhibition. And then in California, the Midwinter International Exposition in 1894 featured a Japanese tea garden, and this is a photograph of that tea garden as it is today. So it was built in 1894, and it's still in Golden Gate Park. Yes. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so these two events helped really to influence a lot of art and architecture movements in the United States. And some of those traditions are really compatible with the philosophy of the arts and crafts movement. You can see in this building, the T building has that kind of timber frame construction, and again, that open to the outdoors, the open patios, and that open air construction, and really strong integration of the building into the gardens, and that use of rock, water, and ponds, really again blending a landscape into the architecture, became very influential in the movement. And one of the architectural firms perhaps best known for the movement is Charles and Henry Green, who had an architectural firm in California in the 1890s up through the 1920s, and you can really see the Japanese influence in their architecture. This is the Gamble House in Pasadena, California, and here you can see those dominating horizontal lines and those low pitch roof lines, very characteristic of Japanese architecture, big overhanging eaves. You can see the exposed rafters and the structural supports, all exposed and part of the architectural design and aesthetic. And then again, the open air porches, and then the terracing down and blending into the sloping topography, very typical of the movement. Then here, especially in this patio area behind the Gamble House, you can see this use of naturalized rock blended into the rock masonry walls, and then that Asian influenced lantern. Beautiful example of that blending of arts and crafts with the Asian aesthetic. So now we are going to turn our attention back to Beech Haven and take our virtual tour. So instead of being out there in 30 degrees, we're going to be in our 70-degree temperature and take our virtual walk. So again, just by orientation, again, this is our site, the Atlanta Highway here, the Middle Oconee River here. This is the Howard Johnson's Senior Soul, the church, the Beech Haven Baptist Church, and this is where the Blind Pig is. There's a little private drive, a paved road that leads into the Beech Haven area. And then right about at the end of that paved road, there is a unpaved drive. And we're going to take our walk along that drive, which parallels the Boulder Creek. We're going to stop and see some of the features, the bridge, a number of ponds. We'll continue on to the summer house, and then a vigorous walk upslope to the Springs area. We'll see some very beautiful features there, and then continue back to the river. So that's where we're headed. Put your walking shoes on. All right. So this is the drive. And I have to say, when you first set foot across that gate at Beech Haven, you know you're in a special place. You are completely immersed in nature. Nature dominates that site everywhere you turn. And it's really just, it's celebrated everywhere you look. And it's hard to imagine that you are surrounded by shopping malls and car dealerships and motels and you name it. This looks like you've driven 100 miles to find a place like this. And this is right in the heart of Athens. Really remarkable, very special place. So as you walk along the driveway, you'll come upon several fish ponds that were a part of the Rowland family retreat that were built. There are about 3 ponds, and now they're dry, so it's a little bit hard to see, but you can begin to see, you'll see this rock work developed throughout the site. So the edge of the road has this kind of very naturalistic rock edging. And then one of the ponds was known as the Lotus Pond. And in this picture, you can see some of that sort of, a little bit of that Asian influence. Oh, gosh darn it. Did it again. You can begin to see some of this Asian influence. There are these rock stepping stones, and then you would come to this overlook to the Lotus Pond. And at that overlook, you'll see this little lantern, a stone lantern that's really kind of iconic of the site. These lanterns are repeated throughout the site, and I believe Charles Rowland created this little design, probably inspired by his trips through Asia. And they're very evocative and reminiscent of Japanese lanterns in his own interpretation. This is a bench that is built alongside one of the ponds, and you can really appreciate some of the craftsmanship that was used to create such a beautiful bench, very naturalistic, and yet has, kind of this presence. And the wonderful thing about this bench is that it's right alongside the pond. And so when you're sitting on the bench, you're sitting on this nice dry bench, but your feet are in the water. So you get that nice little cooling effect of dipping your feet in the water. This is a bridge that goes over the Boulder Creek along the drive, and at that bridge you'll see this little, again, another beautiful rock construction craftsmanship there, again with this bench. And this is just another view of that bridge looking along the creek. And then now we're coming up to the summer house. And so from the drive, there are steps built into the slope leading up to the house. And again, you can see that iconic Japanese lantern structure again there. And then this is the summer house. And this was built in about 1911, and it was actually designed by Effie Rowland. She was very talented. She designed houses. Wow. And she actually designed their house in town. They had an in-town house that she designed, and then she also designed their summer house. And interesting, Charles Rowland was really responsible for most of the landscape work. So they had a little collaboration going on, very similar to Gertrude Jekyll and Edwin Lutyens. Interesting how that works out. So anyway, so this house is, again, has all those hallmarks of an arts and crafts style. You can see the very rustic stone pillars, the open-air porches. There's a use of these peeled logs for that porch. Those columns are peeled logs, and then the wood itself came from the land. So they actually harvested the trees from the land and then had the wood rough sawn on site, used all that wood to build the structure, and then they would have collected the rocks to build the stone columns. So they were very much using the elements of the site to create their retreat. And this is a photograph of a very interesting idiosyncratic aspect of the house. This is a fountain that was built into the porch, into that stone column. And so they used a nearby spring to feed the water up through the top of the column, and then it would trickle down into a little pool in the corner of the porch. You can also see the masonry, the sort of artisanal masonry that they used to build the stonework. There's what's called the grapevine mortar work, kind of very, very distinctive mortar work that was used. I don't know if you can see it very well, but when you go out there, you'll have to look for it. Now, this is just a shot of the inside of the main room of the house. Lots of windows, a lot of views to the outside. And then in that fireplace, there is built in a little quartz rock that was in the heart of a shape of a heart that was found on the side. And they just were enthralled with this beautiful find, and they incorporated it into the design of their chimney. This is the kitchen, just a few quick shots of some of the inside. And then, there are numerous porches, and this is one of the sleeping porches that they used, screened in and very much open to the outside. This is a view of the other side of the house and part of the gardens that would have been there historically. This was taken perhaps last year. You can see the daffodils blooming. Would have been about this time of year. Anyway, this is what it would have looked like in 1911. This is one of the few pictures that we have of the site of the gardens and the house, historic pictures. Very few, hard to find. We're always on the lookout for historic pictures of the site. If you know of any, please let us know, and especially let Carrie know. She and her class have been doing a lot of research into the history and what's there from the past, and she'll talk more about that. Again, a look at some of the gardens that were there. There was once a grape arbor. There would have been flower beds and a kitchen garden at the site. And now we have climbed up this hill to the spring area, and there are a number of stone features here. This is just a table with a bench, an area that very popular for the family would go up here to have picnics. This is their barbecue that they built there. And then this is the spring, and they created a little pond area there. And it got kind of hard to capture in a photograph, but this spring was probably modeled after a water fountain from Korea. And we found this photograph of a fountain in a temple in Seoul, South Korea, that has practically the identical structure, the identical little pond here, practically the same shape as what you'll see in Beech Haven. And on that pond in Beech Haven, there's a little biblical quote there. And so it was really intended, we think, to be kind of a place of meditation and a place for, a spiritual place, and could have been inspired by some of the temples that he visited in his travels throughout Asia. And then one of the most beautiful features on the site is the Camelback Bridge that was built, again, using the native stone work and built into that topography. And again, here's a photograph of another temple in Korea, the Moon Bridge. And so again, that Camelback Bridge was probably very much inspired by his travels through Asia. And then we climb down to the middle Oconee River, and we are done with our walking tour. So thank you so much, and I'm going to turn the podium back to Nat, and we have a few more things to discuss.
That's Big Dog on the River there, the kayaks coming down. It's just around the bend from Beech Haven. I'm going to talk very quickly about the Athens community in Beech Haven historically. Charles Rowland, again, he was a businessman. He had a business downtown, which was just removed a few weeks ago when they were working on the Armstrong Dodge site, built in 1912. But he, again, was very religious, and he established what became known as the Beech Haven Conference. It went on each year for an extended weekend there at Beech Haven from 1913 till in the 1920s. And if you go back through the old newspapers, you'll see all sorts of things in the social pages about activities at Beech Haven. This is the YWCA having a camping party at Beech Haven. Here's students from UGA, you know how religious they are, going to Beech Haven. And it was pretty well known, in fact. For a couple of years, Charles charged people 50 cents to come spend the day looking at the gardens and walking their trails. But that only lasted a couple of years. He got tired of worrying about it. This is a publication, a book that was published in 1933 on the history of gardening in Georgia, and Beech Haven was featured as one of the gardens there. This is our esteemed speaker who's going to share some thoughts with you in a minute. But this was taken a year ago. The Oconee Rivers Greenway Commission, the Historic Preservation Commission, and Cultural Affairs Commissions, which are all voluntary citizens groups that advise the county government, felt that the public really needed to know more about this place. Unfortunately, Beech Haven is not open to the public yet. It'll be several years probably before it is. But we wanted to make sure that people knew about this asset. And so, fortunately, Paul was coming through town and agreed to do a presentation and to visit the site. And he gave a lecture at UGA a year ago, right now. We followed that the next day by at the Linden House by a panel discussion about the significance of this site. And then there was a facilitated roundtable group of people discussing what might be the future of this site. It has great potential as a public park, and that is something that will be coming up in the future. Again, right now, we don't have the resources to protect everything there or to protect people, too, for their safety. Also, to get to the site, you have to cross private property. The county is working with the family to look at future acquisitions there in order to provide that connection. With the interest by the public, the county government came to an agreement with the Athens-Clarke Heritage Foundation, a nonprofit, again, that Amy Kassane is the executive director, and they are now leasing the summer house and the Camelback Bridge for $1. And that's in order for them to be able to raise funds for stabilizing those structures. They're managing the contract for the work performed. The total estimated for stabilization, this is not restoration, this is just keeping it from eroding anymore, is estimated at $55,000. We've got about 16 so far and working on it. Just to show you, though, the urgent need and also the way these funds have been applied. This is the base of the Camelback Bridge, and if you look there, you can see where this is being seriously undermined. We're very concerned that we could lose this structure in a rainstorm. This picture was taken last summer. Here's a more recent picture where they've already applied the funds, working with a mason to stabilize this structure and protect it. The next step is working with the summer house itself, which is, of course, a much more challenging effort, although the house is in very good structural shape for being over 100 years old. They'll be putting a new roof on it. They've already done some pest control work, and there is more coming. So we see Beech Haven as a very important community asset that eventually will be open to the public. Right now, we're leading organized groups to see this site, and this is a picture of the Piedmont Gardeners on a recent tour that they did at Beech Haven. And Lucy is there at the crest of the bridge as the leader of that hike. She gives a wonderful tour and gives you a lot of history. So here's the pitch. We are looking for tax-deductible donations if anyone feels so inspired. Rather than, you don't have to write this down. There are pamphlets in the back of the room. If you're interested in making a contribution, very much appreciated. We'll close this slideshow with a picture of Charles Rowland at the Shoals at Beech Haven, waving goodbye. And I'm going to take a minute to ask Carrie Getches, Dr. Carrie Getches, again, with the design group at the UGA, if she'll talk about the work they've been doing there and the status of research.
Sure. So I don't have it large enough, but I did put another example on the table if you care to look at it. But essentially, I teach in the historic preservation program. And although we do teach about architecture, we also teach about historic landscapes, which one might think initially are just formal design gardens, but it's also about the vernacular, more natural features. And I had the opportunity to work with the Park Service myself for quite a few years, so I've learned quite a bit about what these are and are not and how to think about them. So I've had the honor of being involved with Beech Haven for over a year now. Did not know what I was getting into and have come to realize it's my lifetime, one of my lifetime projects. But it's a really delightful place to be. So I've had 2 classes now basically do detailed documentation at the site. And by that I mean everything from sweeping up so we can see where the edges of the stone walkways are and what the fountains used to look like, looking through historic records in the Special Collections Library, looking through people's photo albums. We've done about 15 different oral histories with various people that either have lived on the property or were associated with it. For example, we've talked with the Beech Haven Baptist Church when they first bought that property, what was on that site prior to. And I actually now know what the original route of the road was that Effie basically dictated to Charles as to how it would be. Have learned through various oral histories that when Effie was trying to site the house, she literally took a chair and would sit on various ridge lines for hours. And she would see how the sun came down, where the breezes came through. So she really did that very hands-on assessment to locate this building. She worked with her husband on the landscape features, and it seems that the design ability that Effie had was definitely passed down because her daughter Catherine essentially sat in a chair on a ridgeline to site her house also. So it's been very interesting talking to the family and learning about this property. But we've been able to, through both GIS technology and computer-aided design, been able to put together some basic mapping information. And aside from the Beech Haven house that you see here and the ponds that Helen talked about, there are actually a number of different structures on what was the original Beech Haven property. And we have made a point of documenting each of those features. There's a log cabin that was constructed in 1900 as the first building on the property, then the Beech Haven summer retreat, and then numerous houses after that. And so we've talked to different branches of the family, and we're trying to document all of these properties, vegetation and structures, so that we can actually pull together a draft National Register nomination for this property. We have done the preliminary research for it and feel like this has not only local significance but state significance. One of the things that's been very interesting for us is, of course, the vegetation, and by that I mean the daffodils. and the bulbs that were planted all around, because I have a friend who's actually an expert in identifying daffodil bulbs over time, and she tells me that the variety of bulbs that are on this property are incredibly indicative of what was happening in the southeast during the early 1900s to 1930s, even to the point of when there was an embargo on Dutch bulbs because of infestations of certain microbes and bugs. When the American nursery industry really came up in the bulb industry, you can actually see kind of these waves of plantings across this property. So it's just a gorgeous property that has all these wonderful springtime flowering things, summertime flowering things, fall flowering things. So we really want to make sure that we capture that in all its glory.
One more. We can have some closing remarks from Paul Duchère. We'd appreciate Paul.
Okay. So, first of all, I want to say I'm really happy to be back in Athens, and I now have a hopeful routine of annual visits here to, so to speak, monitor what's happening at Beech Haven. It is more wonderful this year than it was last year. I had the pleasure of the tour with Lucy yesterday, so if any of you haven't been on such a tour, I would start there, because then you will be hooked and you will be convinced that this is something special. It's beyond something special. I mean, as a person coming from out of the area, okay, perhaps because I was in that sort of arts and crafts world of writing about things and did a book about landscape features. Nevertheless, when I saw this property last year, Ron Thomas breathlessly told me about it before I got here. And then when I got here, I was beyond impressed. Because it's not only significant, I dare I say, locally and to the state, but nationally. There is, in my experience, no comparable site that is quite like this. I mean, you could say that, I guess, about a lot of places, but this place is truly special. It's the combination of the human connection and the human involvement with the design is one thing. Just that alone makes it significant and makes it sort of the epitome of an arts and crafts confection. Here we have something that was created out of love for the land and out of appreciation for using the land, and with a very light touch on the land. So everything that was done at Beech Haven is kind to the land, and I loved especially the part that Lucy told me when she said that they kept the underneath of the house open so that the chickens could eat all the bugs. Little things like that, or the way the wind comes up from the creek, and I'm sure that was part of why that chair sitting proved to be a great value, because it has something about it that when you're up in that house, you just get it. So as an outsider, I feel really privileged to have been able to come here last year when it was just kind of, the layers of the onion were beginning to be unpeeled for the public, and I know that's going to just continue, and I'm really, really encouraged and thrilled that there's momentum forward, that this house, yes, okay, maybe it's not happening as quickly as I or anybody, or Lucy or others would like, but it's happening. And I think just getting out there, more people are going to be sort of taken in by the feeling that's there and why this is so much of a treasure locally. And I just love the idea that it was just sitting in the middle of town all these years, and people have lived here all their lives didn't have a clue what was there. They were just driving by it for decades and had no idea. So it's a very powerful assemblage of elements: the human element, the human story, the local angle, the arts and crafts notion of nature. And certainly the connection to Asian design as such a major handy fit to arts and crafts design is what makes this kind of a home run place in the world of cultural landscapes, I would say. I mean, it's just one of those places you just go, oh God, this is so great, I can hardly stand it. So, not exaggerating. Maybe I'm a little, effusive about it, but I think there's good reason to be. So, I'm picking this up and I'm going to give a little money too this year, because I'm just very delighted that people are waking up about it, and the community is going to, in the long term, this is going to be something that's going to bring people to Athens just because of that site. It's separate from all the other stuff. How about that? It's a whole new angle to Athens, and it's right in the middle of it. So I think that's something to celebrate. So appreciate it. Hopefully see you next year, because I go to the Arts and Crafts Conference in Asheville every year. And Ron and Marty Thomas, I have to say, I want to acknowledge their kindness in hosting me in their home, for introducing me to all the great people and that led me to know about Beech Haven, and their kindness is pretty bottomless, really. Those people, great. And just everybody's been so kind to me, and I come here and I feel like $1 million, because it's just so wonderful to be able to add my 2 cents and have it acknowledged as something meaningful. So I'm very, very proud of that, and thank you for coming to this. It's just many of you were present last year at some of that stuff, and so let's just continue. I mean, I want the snowball to keep rolling. Every year there's going to be, not the literal snowball, but so take one of those and think about it. It's going to be a great thing for everybody, for way past all of our lives. This is going to be a keeping thing. It's going to be a defining feature of the town. So you heard it here. You've been hearing it, recently a lot. So just keep it in mind. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul. So nice to mention snowballs. No, again, we appreciate your coming. I've kept you a long time, but if you have any questions, we'd be glad to try to answer them. Yes, Jerry.
Can I tell a quick story
Please.
about how fast this has come to where it is today? It was my first year as a commissioner. I've only been there 2 years, but it was in my first year. Lucy had taken me to Beech Haven. A group of us out there for a picnic a summer before that. And Lucy sent me an email and said, the county's going to let Beech Haven fall. They're not even recognizing that the building, the summer house, is there. They're not recognizing that the bridge is there. So I talked with some commissioners, and there was no interest in saving this because no one knew what it was. They didn't know anything about it. There was just no interest. One person who's quite well known for historic preservation said, why should we work to save something that we've never seen? And I worked on it, and then Andy Kazan appeared in my eyes, and I said, that might be the answer, is to get the Heritage Foundation involved. And it just, through the work of lots and lots of people, it snowballed to the point where a lot of people know about Beech Haven, but not nearly as many as are going to know about it in a year from now or a year later. So I want to personally thank Lucy for taking care of things, and all the other people for the work that you did to get this thing cranked up. And of course, Nat, Ron, Paul, the folks at UGA, thank you very much. It means a lot to our grandchildren.
Any other questions or comments? Yes.
We lived in Forest Heights, which borders on that, for 20 years, and when I think literally nobody knew about the place. And our children, one of whom is here, Owen, began to explore that property, no doubt illegally, crawling over. But he said, you got to come and see this stuff. So we went back there. It's thrilling to our family to realize that this has been discovered and it's going to be preserved. You might be amused to know that the legend among our children when they were younger growing up there was that there were occult practices going on in that location, and probably animal sacrifices and that sort of thing.
We don't want to talk about that.
When we found out it was actually a Presbyterian center, that was amusing irony. Our son did a little bit of preliminary investigation. I think he found the number of the Rowlands and called one of the family members and asked about it, and got some interesting insight that way. So we're thrilled to see that it's going to take place.
Oh, great. I don't want to keep you with the bad weather. Yes.
Are there any other known cypress trees in Clarke County?
Lucy, you want to answer that question?
I only know of that one, and there's a story behind that. There actually are two. My father-in-law and his brother-in-law, and Alice Rowland's, Steiner's husband, were out fishing one time in a pond, and they each saw these seedlings coming up out of the water, and they each grabbed one and pulled it out. Black flies went everywhere, so they hightailed it out of there, but they planted them there. And there was a bald cypress and a pond cypress. And you can still see the cypress knees, and I think if it were ever flooded again, you would probably see more growth come back. But it's a pretty big cypress.
Yeah.
It's been there probably since the 30s.
That's on the edge of one of the artificial ponds that the family constructed. Thank you, folks, for coming out. Really appreciate it. And if you have any other questions, we're glad to answer.